Hello, welcome to this session, The Great British Energy Crisis. I'm Rob Lyons and I'm Science and Technology Director at the Academy of Ideas. Labour has set out enormously ambitious plans to decarbonise the electricity grid by 2030, just 6 years away, prioritising renewable energy sources like wind and solar power while reducing the nation's dependence on fossil fuels. But there are plenty of commentators warning about the feasibility and impact of this strategy. Renewable energy, while crucial to achieving decarbonisation, is notoriously unpredictable. Moreover, most of the UK's nuclear power stations, which have long provided a steady and reliable source of low-carbon electricity, are set to close between 2026 and 2030. Will Labour's energy strategy lead to a cheaper, more secure electricity supply, as the government claims? Or are we on the brink of an energy crisis, with higher costs and increasing vulnerability to blackouts? Are higher bills a price worth paying to tackle climate change, or when global emissions are still climbing, a pointless sacrifice of British jobs and living standards? So that's roughly the kind of terrain we might want to be talking about. I've got a fantastic panel to discuss this. First to speak is, on my left, is Lord David Frost. He's a member of the House of Lords, probably most famous as the UK's Brexit negotiator, but also a columnist at the Telegraph, where he's written about net zero policies quite a few times. Then on David's left is Professor Dr. Michaela Kendall. She's the CEO of Adelan, the UK hydrogen champion for mission innovation for the UK government. Then over there on the right is James Woodhousen. He's visiting Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at London South Bank University. And among many other things, he's co-author of a book called Energize, which is all about the future of energy. And finally, on my near right is Dr. Shahar Ali, a former deputy leader of the Green Party, and I imagine that Green Party suggests a certain outlook, environmental outlook. So we've got a really good range of speakers and viewpoints to kick this discussion off. So without any further ado, David, would you like to say your piece?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Rob. Thank you for having me here. Just to kick off, there's so much that can be said, and I just want to focus on three things, I guess. First of all, what's the starting point for the Labour government on net zero? What can we expect of Ed Miliband, and where is that going to take us? And third, what should sceptics of net zero, of which I admit I'm one, what should we actually do over the next few years, given the politics? So, first of all, what's the starting point? I mean, my view is we're in the middle of a policy that's built on a fundamental misconception, which is the belief that we're facing an environmental catastrophe which only reordering our whole societies can deal with, rather than, as I believe it is, a problem which ordinary policymaking can manage. And I think it's also based on a fallacy, which is that you can operate advanced modern societies which are good for human welfare and flourishing without lots and lots of energy. And in my view, you just can't do that, and the evidence points to that. So the policy that we're on already is already having a damaging effect. Energy and electricity consumption is falling in the UK and in the EU, and is actually beginning to in the US too. We've got the highest electricity prices in the world in the UK. EU is not far behind. And all this is, in my view, a big part of the declining productivity and growth, deindustrialization, export of carbon emissions to the rest of the world. And it's built on a series of misconceptions and I would say deceits in places to make it palatable. The belief that the net zero program will actually generate growth. I don't believe it will. I think it's likely to be a drag on growth, but we're told to believe that will increase growth. The belief that renewable costs are falling rather than what they actually are, which is rising. A good assessment of the actual accounts and costs of solar and wind shows they're at least 50% above the government's predictions in 2023 and going the wrong way. There's an assumption that major problems like intermittency are just going to be solved somehow without there being solutions. And in the discourse, there are lots of elementary economic errors, like counting jobs as a benefit and a cost, assuming there's nothing else you can do with all the capital that's going into net zero, and so on and so forth. And finally, we've taken a non-market approach to doing this. Instead of pricing carbon, allowing the market to work it out best, we've got a very dirigiste policy in place already, lots and lots of targets. So in a way, we've got the worst of both worlds. We haven't got a free market. We haven't got effective government direction or centralisation either. So it's a mess. That's the first answer to my first question. Second, what can we expect of Labour? So I gave a lecture for the Global Warming Policy Foundation last year called Not Dark Yet, but it's getting there. And I predicted that as the costs and the contradictions grew, governments would do one of two things. Either they would sort of slow down with all this pay lip service to the targets, but in practice not act accordingly with them, or they would recognise they were stuck on the targets and they double down on the catastrophism and the crisis. Now, I think we might be seeing across the EU the first of those, but here in the UK, we're definitely seeing the beginnings of the second of those. And the Labour government seems to have no clear strategy other than sort of do everything and spend as much as is necessary. And so we've lost the last coal plant, we've got the solar farms covering fields, we've got the closing down of the North Sea, and so on and so forth. And you have to feel the government doesn't quite know how to go about this. Does it really believe in its own target? It's doubling down on the irrationality. And I know Dieter Helm, who is obviously much more climate worried by the climate issue than I am, wrote this week, the government trots out nonsense about getting away from high and volatile gas fossil fuel prices and makes silly statements like the claim that renewables are 10 times cheaper. What is the storage strategy? That's another element of this, not even mentioned in this famous letter from Ed Miliband to the head of NESO. So it's simply not been solved. There's much more reliance on interconnectors, and that's a big worry for me. I've been burned when I was in number 10 by the experience of the competition between European governments over vaccines, the attempt to cut off electricity to Jersey that we were threatened with in 2021. I believe that when the chips are down, governments look to their own people first, and why shouldn't they? So reliance on interconnectors is a risky strategy in crisis. So the only possible effect of all of this is more costs, more expensive energy, more subsidies, less security, more strain on the grid, which I suspect will show up as rationing rather than blackouts, to be honest, at least in the short run. And more of the same: slower growth, slower productivity, lower investment, more lifestyle preaching and control, and more social conflict. So finally, and just briefly, what is the right thing to do for people who are sceptical about all this? And I would say 5 things. First of all, keep talking, keep underlining about the extent to which the UK is now an outlier on policy, on prices, on deindustrialisation, and so on, and keep talking about the costs. Second, push out the sensible alternative, which in my view is gas to nuclear, is dismantling the subsidies and price supports, is pausing the renewable programs, getting back towards the market. Third, it's keep denouncing the current policy. The more fragile the current policy is, the more private sector will be reluctant to invest in it, the less that will get done, and the starting point for correcting it will be easier. Fourth, really important to oppose the byproducts of renewables, the pylons, the cables, the onshore wind farms, solar. All these are part of the problem. They damage the environment for no good reason. Don't fall into the trap of some in the YIMBY, yes, in my backyard community, who say building anything is good. Building houses is good. Building wind farms in the countryside, building cables, pylons for them is not good, and we shouldn't feel bad about opposing them. Finally, stop paying lip service to the climate catastrophe. I think the evidence shows climate change is a problem. It isn't an existential one. And the catastrophism is designed to make us fearful, accepting of the remodelling of our societies. And I think we can and we will adapt as long as we don't destroy our economies on the way. Thank you.
Mohair comes, I suppose.
Thank you. Yes, and just on the title of the talk, is that better? Yeah. Just on the title of the talk, I don't believe there is an energy crisis, actually. I believe there's an energy management crisis, which is a slightly different thing. And I don't want people to frighten you, and I don't want to put any misinformation into this talk whatsoever. So I'm going to focus on facts. I'm a scientist. I focus on numbers and facts. It's actually manageable through good policy making and technology. So politics are actually ruling this UK debate on energy. And that's, for a scientist, that's really obvious. So we need to have a more democratic press. We need to have more public debates like this. And I think this event last year was a real eye-opener for me. So the first point is, I don't believe there's an energy crisis. The second point is, last year was a baptism of fire for me coming to this event, because it was really helpful to hear this debate going on. The debate format is incredibly valuable because you get to hear things from people and get to question them, and then we get to debate it amongst ourselves. And that is the way to engage and to educate and to exchange. So for me, this is a really valuable experience, and I hope everybody in the room finds it that way today. As I was discussing with Helen Pankhurst a couple of weeks ago, we still need more women involved in policy making and more female technologists in this debate as well. I still can't believe the Pankhursts are still calling for female emancipation in the UK, but I'm hoping that this will eventually happen. We do have 40% of our MPs now who are female. However, it takes more than that, because we are living in a technological age and we need more female techies out there, and we need to encourage women into it, not put them off through violence and threats on the internet. So women and men both have to stand up for women in tech, or we have to face the social consequences. And I think actually part of this debate is part of the social consequences. So, number 3, we need more facts in this debate. And as a scientist, I rely on facts. I look at numbers all day long. I don't really care so much about opinion. I'm much more interested in the facts. So I hope we can exchange those today. Nobody's objective. Not one in the panel is objective. No one in the room is objective. No expert. No politician. We're all subjective. But ideally, through this forum, we can iron out that subjectivity and create an objective opinion. But there are colossal vested interests in energy, and we have to recognise that. We have to understand that these resources are applied to lobby politicians, to misinform people through the press, and to muddy the waters of public debate. So this is why this today is so valuable, and I welcome every question and criticism and hope that we can go through it together. But we also need to encourage disruptors. We need people who will say, hold on a minute, I don't believe that, I want to question it. So that's really invaluable. That's always invaluable in science, it's always invaluable in politics. So the fourth thing, the only way to excavate key facts in this debate is for transparency. I'm looking for transparency in public funding of energy. I've never seen it. I've tried to get it. I've tried to get it in academia. I cannot get it. And I think that's what unites everybody in this room. We're all frustrated by that lack of transparency. And we're actually unable to hold people accountable because we can't actually get to the facts. So we need to demand it, and that is something that we can all do and unite around. There is subsidy in energy everywhere, and we have to understand that. Some of it's historical, it's not purposeful, but it is historical, and it's certainly not focused on renewables. But renewables get subsidy too, don't get me wrong. We have to hold those people accountable for refusing to provide transparency on all subsidy. And then we need to engage expertise, we need to look academics, industrialists and politicians to create good policy. Winston Churchill had a phrase, we want scientists on tap, not on tap, not on top. And I think that phrase has aged very, very badly in an age of technology. So the fifth point is we cannot repeat these past mistakes. We've made terrible mistakes as a country because we all know in this room that Britain invents things and then we offshore it for somebody else to make money from it. That's what we've done traditionally. Everybody understands that. And everybody, by the way, that I speak to understands that around the world too. So Britain has to give up that habit of invention and shipping it out just at the point it makes money. And on that point, the green economy is the second fastest growing sector in the UK. Technology is number one. We can't now turn our back on technology and say, no, we don't want anything like that here. 97% of our solar in the UK and in Europe is installed from China. So we invented the technology, we developed it, and then we shipped it out. China didn't take it from us. We actually wanted to do that, and America did it also. Lithium was discovered in Britain, and yet we refused to develop the technology. With hydrogen technology, we can't just make the same mistake again. This is foolish to offshore billions per year, as we're doing at the moment. So it's not really a drag on growth if we have to keep it here. It should be a source of growth, and we need to invest. Thank you. We need to invest in sovereign capability in energy. That means we're not reliant on imports of technologies from China or anywhere else. We have to be making the net zero products that we say we need. And that is a good investment. Even if we don't say everything has got to be net zero technologies, it will be part of the portfolio because that is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world right now. So that actually represents good economic policy. We need to level up the playing field across all of those technologies. Certain technologies do get more than others. I have not been able to find how much goes into nuclear energy because despite my questions to government, I've never been told. But it's roughly around £40 billion per year that goes into nuclear science. And that's public funding. That's not private funding. So I'm interested in looking at those numbers and comparing that with hydrogen, which I know it's roughly around 15 million per year, possibly 20 million. But compared to the 40 billion of public resource that we're spending on nuclear, there's a lot of subsidy going into nuclear as far as I can see.
Okay. Thank you very much. James.
Well, since I'm supposed to know about innovation, I thought I'd try to bring you some innovation today and try to explain why is Ed Miliband so willfully stupid? Why is that? That's an opinion, as Michaela would say, and so you mustn't clap it. But I must say that facts alone, like the intermittency of renewables, or the fact that Britain is only responsible for 1% of emissions, don't cut it really in political debate. That's a problem, Michaela, I had with pure facts, right? I'll leave aside the fact that the green economy, however defined, may be fast-growing. Does anybody know here, in a hurry, how many jobs there are in solar power in Britain? 6,000. And in renewables, 11,000. That's Office for National Statistics. Quite surprising. So when we hear for the 90th time about, the Green New Deal, the New Green Deal, the deal, you get the point. The facts are there, they're in ONS, and still people pursue them. So why are they so stupid? And I want to say that despite my aversion to, talk to my agent, please, my aversion to, acronyms and initials and things like that, I'm going to give you a few P's, if you'll allow me. And the first of those is the influence of Nancy Pelosi and the Californians. When she became Speaker in the House, she says in her recent book that energy independence for America was one of the things that made her take such an exalted position. And when we listen to Ed Miliband now, we hear that we're going to be independent of nasty regimes the more we use renewables. It doesn't seem to occur to him what Michaela rightly said, that renewables, 90% of all renewable stuff, including electric vehicle batteries, just published my article on Spike about 10 minutes ago on that, if you really need a cure for insomnia. You'll find that China is responsible for all of that. And that, the renewables do not give us energy independence any more than reliance on Saudi Arabia or people like that might do. But nevertheless, Californians have an enormous influence on the Labour Party and on media and on workers and all of that. And that's one of the reasons why Miliband and his cohorts, all those spads at the age of 22, are so, in awe of the net zero agenda. The second P is to do with a historic tradition in Britain, which you're not taking notes. I can't get my students to do it, but I'm going through all these P's, to help you do it. But never mind, we face a crisis in Western civilization. Thank you. The second P is Puritanism. If you look at Just Stop Oil or Friends of the Dirt, you'll see, that's funny. You'll see that frugality and literally the hair-shirt philosophy, swampy in the trees, if you're that old from way back, that has a long tradition in Britain, along with Methodism, which is more influential in the Labour Party, always has been more influential than Marxism. So the desire to show off your frugality, to beef up your Tesla as, conspicuous non-consumption, is a very big deal in British politics. And it's become, and that all that behaviour control stuff from Labour is all to do in the historic influence of Puritanism. The third factor in Britain is, why do people care about energy management? And that is because we're obsessed with property. Property. The bullet of British capitalism, in many ways, even more than the city, and David, maybe you'd like to contest this, but I'm sure some light will come from beneath, is, housing, estates, land, and all of that stuff. And that's the thing that, really obsesses people. And, location, and the dreadful Channel 4 couple, and all of that. That's what transfixes bourgeois society, and not energy. On the contrary, what you want is an ardour, which will, cost you 40,000 times as much energy as a normal gas cutter. And when we're talking about property, of course, we're talking about planning. It's number 4, if you're keeping up with me. My planning used to be about how do you plan new energy supply and new infrastructure. Now it's how do you stop energy supply and new infrastructure. Right? And that's why nuclear power is so expensive in this country, because you can always call another P public inquiries about everything. And you know that to build a tunnel, you need 350,000 pages of legal documentation. So in the old days, when I was a pure unadulterated Marxist, it used to be about the falling rate of profit. But now it's how many lawyers does it take to make a nuclear power station? That's where we've got to. How can you delay it? And so on. The fifth P is PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics. That's what Miliband read at Oxford and then LSE. And, it's quite remarkable. If you go back to C.P. Snow and his famous essay, The Two Cultures, he said, artists never talk to scientists, scientists never talk to artists. But if you read him carefully and you read Frank Furedi's critique, he also said that we don't want this pure science, we want applied science. Push off Albert Einstein and all of that. We want engineers. Nowadays, they don't know who Einstein is, and they don't want the engineers either. They're dissing both theoretical science, it's just a head in the clouds. It's invention, not innovation. Lord Sainsbury said that for many years. So the PPE outlook, equips these young spads and Miliband and people like that to do devastation. The most important factors, to conclude, in messing us all up is what Lord Frost so eloquently talked about, is what Frank Furedi calls presentism. And presentism says we've got nothing to learn from previous engineers and laws of thermodynamics and all of that. we can flout the laws of thermodynamics by saying heat pumps, produce more energy than they get fed into them. It's an absolutely brilliant overturning of science. And we're not going to prepare for the future except through mirages like energy independence. What we are going to go on about is the apocalypse, and the catastrophism that David has so rightly condemned. So just to conclude, the article on Spike, which I do commend to you, goes into electric car batteries, because if you look at the International Energy Agency, and I'd rather not, you'll see their new report, World Energy Outlook, is absolutely gung-ho about electricity, about nuclear. They say there's a nuclear revival. There isn't, if you look at their charts, their own charts. But the reason they go so big on it is propulsion. They want to move from the internal combustion engine to lithium. By the way, Michaela, you must watch Channel 4. Know the enemy, everybody. There's a mine happening in Cornwall that everybody's very bullish about because it's going to be lithium. And why does the IEA, back all of that, and Channel 4 back all of that? Because for them, fossil fuels are the excrement of society. And that's really what critics have long said. And this says more about them and their worldview than what the prospects for electric vehicles. I don't mind EVs. I think the jury's still out on them. But a whole lot of the mortgaging of our future, according to the IEA, is towards that 7th P, propulsion. Don't buy the hype. Don't buy a Tesla until it's a lot cheaper.
James, you're not supposed to just hold the red card. It means that you're supposed to stop talking. Well, right, Shara.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks very much. I'm really delighted to be on the panel. I should start with a disclaimer, which is I'm not here representing the Green Party of England and Wales as such. Apparently, they seem to think that somebody who believes in the reality of biological sex is not fit to be a national spokesperson. Now, I'm hoping if I were to ask everybody in the room whether they did believe that there are two sexes and that they're immutable, you would agree with me. But unfortunately, and I would just like to check, if I may, when I spoke at Buxton Festival 3 years ago, actually, somebody came up to me afterwards, wow, that was a hostile audience. Could you raise your hand if you consider yourself an environmentalist? Okay, good. And in the last session, actually, we had somebody distinguish what kind of environmentalist he was. And he said, I'm a non-woke environmentalist. So that's fine. Could you also raise your hand? These aren't necessarily mutually exclusive categories, but could you also raise your hand if you take yourself not to believe in anthropogenic climate change? Yeah, see, that's a fair number. So I'd just like to start. I'm going to make 3 points, essentially. One about the framing of the debate, which I think is really important. We've really had reference made to facts, opinions. How do we navigate our way through differences of opinion? And then I'll say something, I think, about tactics, the kind of political tactics which might offend you and cause greater divisiveness than I think should be necessary. And then finally, if I've got time, and if not during the Q&A, just to say a little bit about technology and what role and place that might have. So firstly, in terms of framing of the debate, one of the first stalls I visited actually yesterday, I was somewhat assailed by this placard. Is there anybody from that stall? Yeah, no to net zero. And I had a good conversation around what they meant by that. And perhaps they thought, oh, you're an environmentalist, I better be careful, okay? No, let's not be careful. Let's be straightforward and blunt. What do you mean by that? Are you skeptical or about the very idea that we need to reduce carbon emissions? Hence why I asked you, some of you were prepared to raise your hand and say, I don't actually think that anthropogenic climate change is real. So that's going to cause us potentially a problem. But why am I here from the Green Party talking to people who probably fundamentally disagree with me on some basic facts? I think that's what politics is about. I don't just go about speaking to people who agree with me. I actually enjoy the challenge. I relish the challenge of speaking to people who disagree with me. Why is that? The fundamental reason why is that I'm not infallible. I could be wrong. I want to have the very debate that senior Greens just a few years ago ruled, and they like ruling, in an authoritarian fashion. Green spokespersons shouldn't be engaging a debate with climate change deniers. Now, why is that? Is it because we're scared we might be wrong? I put it to you that that's what the sentiment is projected, that we might be wrong. Now, I've come across, including here and including previous debates, people who, of course, eloquent and passionately put the contrary view of why they don't believe in anthropogenic climate change. But we need to have that debate, and ultimately, it shows great misanthropy for Greens environmentalists to think that they go into politics to write off everybody who disagrees with me. The trouble with that is it's fundamentally authoritarian and anti-libertarian, because we use the ballot box. So one of the greatest fears that comes from this approach is that if politicians are unprepared to speak to me simply because they disagree with me, what would they be prepared to do when they're in power? Will they just ignore my wishes? Would they ignore what it is that I want or what it is that I say is most important? And I don't think, and even within our constitution, parliamentarians are supposed to serve everybody, irrespective of whether or not they voted for them. So that is a problem in terms of political framing. There will be individuals here who are going to say to me, contrary to what I think is the case, like IPCC reports, I'll take one authority figure, I'll take one scientist, and you'll take another one and say, well, no, that's not how it is, that's not how I see things. We desperately need to have a view, a challenging debate about those facts. I think there's a reality about the situation in terms of carbon emissions have gone up. They're the highest that they've ever been. In the last session, somebody was saying carbon is a necessity, right? It's not a pollutant. Well, again, that's framing the situation wrongly. It's a pollutant insofar as it's a greenhouse gas. We're not saying that it isn't a necessary part of the fabric of the air that we breathe. That's a separate question. So just in terms of the framing of the debate, it's vital that we speak to people who disagree with us, because the alternative is authoritarianism. I'm against authoritarianism. I don't want, it's all about means and ends. I do want to live in a sustainable fashion. I do believe that the planet we are living beyond our means, with potentially 10% of the richest expending 50% of the carbon pollution. I do think that's an inequitable situation that needs to be changed. There is pollution happen anyway, in terms of the oceans are becoming increasingly uninhabitable for all the creatures that live there. Species extinction is on an all-time high. These are matters we might be able to agree upon, even if we don't agree upon the reasons for them. So that's another basis to work out the things on which we can agree, and to decide, for example, I don't want to live in a planet where the oceans are uninhabitable for whatever reason. So in addition to the climate so-called existential emergency or not, we are also facing an environmentalist calamity in terms of just pollution effects of us living beyond our means. So we can agree about certain things, and then what is the solution? How do we propose to move forward after that? Well, I'm not proposing that, if you were to say, I don't buy into net zero, and therefore I'm not going to comply with your policy to change how I live. I'm not going to fit insulation, even if you subsidise for that for me. I'm not going to accept your offer of a smart meter. You could say all those things, and the issue, my response isn't going to be like throwing canned tomato soup, right, at Van Gogh, or frustrating your attempt to get to work because I'm sitting on top of a train in Canning Town, right? I think these are very poor tactics, because they alienate the very people who may disagree with you, and they're not going to come on board simply because you're frustrating them in going about their daily lives. So finally, in terms of technology, there was an interesting panel around the rights and wrongs of nuclear power, and we can have that discussion again, in terms of, is that part of the options for change? I think what I should say at a stroke is that I'm not a technophobe. I do think one of the commonalities between those who disagree fundamentally on the climate science, I think on all sides there is a degree of optimism. Those who perhaps say it's not an emergency but it is a serious problem, their optimism suggests to them they have a faith in human ingenuity, if you like. They think that we'll be able to fix it. Now, I actually think they've got a point. I do believe that, I do to some extent, believe in moral progress. I do think societies have been able to overcome, using engineering solutions, ways in which we can fix problems. I do think we've got a rock and a hard place now, territory at the moment, because I don't think we can realistically maintain our living standards, which I grant are good and worth having, as other side of the world would attest. I do think that that's a difficult proposition to sustain whilst carrying on business as usual. So that's essentially what this is about. This is about, can we carry on business as usual using technological solutions to fix this, or do we actually have to abate our lifestyle? And what does that look like? Could it actually be a better form of life, a more community form of life with decentralized, decarbonised energy? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.